I want to talk a little bit about the story I saw recently that kind of wraps things up for our class this summer in terms of social media and the communication of news and such, and weather in particular. It had to do with how the news communication business is kind of falling apart in terms of on a national level. We're losing the mainstream media kind of paradigm of news coverage from the major networks and such. It was a former BBC reporter who did the story and did a speech on it and to a group, and the story was published in Nieman Lab, a website I saw. Basically, it talks about how traditional journalism is basically dying on the major network news level. The major networks and cable stations, that sort of thing, and that it's all becoming more like a citizen journalist kind of paradigm. With podcasts and Substacks prevailing, and that this person says is the future of news. It's really kind of destroying traditional news coverage and mainstream media. She personally blames the perception that there's lots of biases and opinions in all of the news, traditional news, but then goes further and states that with all of the individual podcasts and stuff, citizen journalists, so to speak, that part of the new journalism mode is to provide context to a news story and to offer an opinion, more or less, on what the story is about, and not just the news. That's the new kind of flavor of what she's suggesting is a good way to go with journalism, or where it's headed. And I would argue that is just kind of reinforcing the trend that everybody's complaining about right now, which is biases and opinions in the news. We all go to our own ecosystems of information, right? We tend to follow where we have a confirmation of what we believe in, or what we are emotionally tied to, and that's just human nature. And by having so many fractured components out there where we're getting information, it kind of is disingenuous a little bit in terms of we are still looking for our own opinions to be verified. All right. So I would say that the argument that this is happening because of the biased nature of mainstream news coverage kind of doesn't hold water in some respects. I do think there are larger issues at hand, and I think it has to do with just the fact that we have so many sources of information now. Social media was the beginning of it, and now we're just seeing an explosion of podcasts and Substacks, and everybody kind of going their own and doing their own investigative reporting, that sort of thing, which is great. But I do think we lose a lot by losing that centralized source of information. And by that I mean there's a certain gravitas that comes with having institutional backing, having the financial backing and the resources, and the people who are professionals in journalism, for example, who all kind of are come together in terms of investigating stories. They have the resources to do it. They have the network of people to talk to and communicate with, and then they have the resources to report breaking news globally on the scene live for all of us to see and all of us to share simultaneously, rather than in little bits and pieces from different sources. And I think there's some importance to that. I think if we lose that shared moment of seeing breaking news happening from reliable sources, yes, they have to be reliable and trustworthy, but we have to have like one or maybe several main sources we can turn to, which we've had traditionally. And I think we're losing that by the suggestion that we're going to lose most of our traditional media, major media sources. So that's my take on that. Also, from a weather perspective, which goes to what this class is all about, the social science of meteorology, and how the media is involved in it, it's the same thing. We are going to see a kind of a change in the paradigm of how weather is covered. We may see a trend toward more hub systems of weather. In other words, less of the local human touch in the forecast and more of a forecast originating from maybe some other source elsewhere. We're seeing more and more social media sites that are doing just weather content. And so everybody's getting their information from different places for the weather now. And we've had that, of course, in the past, but it seems to be happening more and more now. And there's more and more competition. Who has the strongest voice? Who has the biggest platform to spread that information? Up to now, it's been television, right? Local TV stations. That may change at some point. In fact, it probably will, because we're seeing more of the trend of this kind of going crazy out there with all kinds of weather information out there in all kinds of formats. And I think by having that, we are tempting fate in terms of losing trust in the weather forecasting business. In other words, if people lose trust in the information they're seeing, they're going to lose trust in the whole profession of weather forecasting, period. And that goes to the social science of all of this, right? So that's what this course is all about. So I would like to share that thought with you as we close things up for this class. That I don't see any easy answers. I think the paradigm happening in the news industry is also translating into the weather industry in terms of how do we maintain trust in the products that we're offering. In the case of weather, it's the forecast. I think by offering so many different sources of that information from, in many cases, non-credentialed weather people who are just kind of guessing at things. And yes, weather is a guesswork, of course, but it's speculation pretty much. That's what forecasting is. But when you have everybody involved in it from every different source, and then you have competing voices, and then you have everybody sharing multiple graphics, and just, basically an overload of information that I talked about in the first day of this class, right? Information overload. So I think that's a potential problem. So as far as the social science of all of this, how does it impact this? The communication, our source of the information, the senders, so to speak. We hopefully still have the Weather Service and NOAA to give us those severe weather alerts. We have to have that, right? We have to have a central source for severe weather alerts. That's crucial, in my opinion. And then in terms of how that is communicated via broadcast meteorologists, maybe we're going to lose that local source of weather information. There's that possibility. But again, time will tell. So I think in terms of the senders, there will probably be some change in how that's all handled. The communications itself will change. We're already seeing that through social media, et cetera, et cetera. AI being used in weather apps, all of that kind of stuff we've talked about a lot in this class. And then if people don't have any trust in the forecast because of whoever they're particularly listening to, and they're getting so many conflicting viewpoints on what's going to happen, and therefore they're confused. And I think the confusion is what can lead to a lack of trust. So bottom line, I'm going to wrap this up, believe me. Bottom line, I think by having so many sources and voices in the field and breaking it up so much, maybe losing the local human contact that we've had traditionally for all these years at some point, and just depending on AI, for example, more than ever, I think we can have more confusion in how everything is interpreted and looked at from the public. And the confusion leads to distrust, and distrust leads to unresponsiveness to a serious weather situations where you might not respond appropriately in life-threatening weather situations, for example. So I think, like I said, throughout this class, it all cycles around. The social science of it all kind of cycles between all of those different factors, which is what I've tried to convey when I've had you do your case study work and stuff, your little reports each week. Try to show how it's all intertwined. Every piece of that social science fabric is intertwined in some way. And I think we have to seriously look at that. And thank goodness folks at NSSL and other areas are doing significant research in all of this. And hopefully, come up with some answers that will make all of us safer and happier and more trusting of the weather forecast when we see those forecasts and such. So with that, Ken, that's one of my kind of closing thoughts for this class. I hope that leaves you with something to think about as you leave this course that we've talked about in so many different angles. All right, thanks.